The first time I saw the barbed wire glinting in my backyard, it didn't look like community safety. It looked like a war zone. And the worst part was realizing the battlefield was my own grass, my wife's half-finished flower beds, the space we were supposed to heal in, not fight in. My name is Ethan Cole, my wife is Laura Cole, and a few months before all this started, we thought we'd finally outrun the noise of our old life. We left the cramped apartment, the late-night emails, the constant low-level panic of deadlines and hospitals and grief, and we landed on a quiet street called Oak Ridge Lane, tucked inside a neat little HOA kingdom known as the Maple Crest Association. The kind of place realtors describe with words like sanctuary and family-friendly, and say it like a spell that will fix everything that's broken inside you. The house itself wasn't the selling point. Not really. 2 stories, generic siding, the same color as 3 other houses on the block, but the backyard, that was different. A deep, green rectangle framed by old oaks and maples, a patch of earth that felt like it might actually belong to us. Laura, who teaches horticulture at the community college, saw an instant vision of raised beds, climbing roses, tomatoes heavy on the vine. I saw something simpler, a place where I could drop my briefcase, shut the sliding glass door, and not hear anybody asking for quarterly projections for at least a few hours. We moved in on a cold, bright morning, our boxes full of things that had survived the last few years with us. The good stuff and the haunted stuff, photos we couldn't look at too long, clothes from hospital waiting rooms, a life that had been cracked right down the middle by a loss no one knows what to say about. This house was supposed to be the glue, the clean page, the promise that maybe, if we kept our heads down and planted enough flowers, the ache in the middle of everything would soften. While I buried myself in spreadsheets at my new home office, Laura buried her hands in the soil. She mapped the backyard like a general planning a campaign, testing soil, sketching beds, muttering Latin plant names under her breath. I'd watch her from the kitchen window, the dirt on her hands, the light in her face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might finally be stepping out of the fog. That's when the HOA floated into our lives like it was no big deal, just envelopes in the mailbox with the Maple Crest Association logo, newsletters about potlucks and pool hours, a handbook full of rules about acceptable shades of beige for mailboxes and the maximum height of your lawn in inches. I skimmed them and laughed, told Laura it was just suburban red tape, the price of peace and a clean sidewalk. She didn't laugh as much. She read every line, circled the weird ones, but in the end we agreed on the same strategy: smile, comply where it matters, don't poke the bear. Then one morning, the bear walked straight into our yard with a truck and a roll of barbed wire. Laura was outside early, as always, kneeling by the bed where she planned to plant herbs, when she heard the low growl of a diesel engine. By the time I looked up from my laptop, she was standing at the edge of the yard, shovel in one hand, staring at a group of men unloading posts and heavy black fencing like they were building a prison yard, not touching her flowers, not knocking on the door, just driving stakes into our ground like we weren't even there. I stepped outside right as she called. "Excuse me, this is private property," her voice steady but thin with disbelief. One of the guys, big shoulders, clipboard, that permanent, not my problem look, finally turned and said, like it explained everything, "We're installing a safety barrier, ma'am, HOA directive," as if those words were a magic key that opened every yard on the block. When did I approve a safety barrier through my garden? Laura shot back. The guy shrugged, said she'd have to take it up with the association. By the time I got down the steps, several yards of thick fencing were already unrolled, ugly, barbed, slicing our lawn almost in half. The sight of it hit something deep in my chest, something I didn't even know was still loaded. I told them to stop. Now, not later, not at the end of the day, now. I told them if they didn't, I'd have a lawyer on the phone before they could set the next post. The foreman looked me over, weighed how much trouble I might be, then gave a tight nod and told his crew to pause. "You've got until the end of the day to sort it with the HOA," he said, like he was doing me a favor, then retreated to his truck. Inside, the woman at the association office sounded like she'd been trained not to care. She said the fence was part of a new community safety initiative, something about unspecified threats. When I asked what threats, she said it was confidential. When I asked when we had supposedly agreed to this, she told me I could bring my concerns to the next meeting, which, conveniently, was a week away. She ended the call by telling me we were strongly advised not to interfere with the installation. Like we were misbehaving children, not the legal owners of the dirt they were punching holes into. That evening, Laura and I stood in the fading light, looking at the half-finished fence, its barbs catching the last bits of sun, turning our soft little backyard into something sharp and hostile. She hugged herself against the cold, said, almost to herself, that this wasn't about safety, not the way they were doing it, and I felt it too. That itch at the back of my mind that said the story we'd been given didn't add up. The next morning, she found the first crack in their story. Near one of the posts, almost hidden at the base, was a small metal emblem. Not the HOA logo, not some local contractor, but a sleek, corporate badge stamped with the name Aegis Perimeter Systems. She took a picture and showed me, and the look on my face when I recognized that this was not neighborhood hire guy with a truck kind of gear, but serious, expensive, security-grade hardware, only confirmed what she already felt in her gut. While I was on hold with the HOA again, demanding answers, getting bounced around, Laura started digging online. She found Aegis Perimeter Systems' website, full of buzzwords about threat neutralization and perimeter dominance, photos of military bases and riot control setups. Nothing about friendly garden fences for quiet streets. An article buried in a local paper mentioned a partnership between Maple Crest and Aegis to enhance neighborhood security, but the details were vague. Everything blurry where it should have been sharp. We went next door to talk to the Parkers, an older couple who'd lived on Oak Ridge Lane long before we arrived. They were polite but nervous, glancing over their shoulders like the azaleas had ears. They'd heard about the initiative. They said they'd gotten some notice, but they didn't ask questions. Last time someone made a fuss, they got hit with surprise violations and their tax assessment somehow jumped. Mr. Parker muttered, "It's not worth the trouble." And the way he said it made my stomach turn, because fear like that doesn't come out of nowhere, it's cultivated. That was the moment Laura whispered, half to me, half to herself, "This isn't just a fence, it's control." And I realized we weren't just dealing with a fussy HOA. We were up against something that liked to work in the dark. I called an old contact, a real estate attorney named Monica Reyes, sharp mind, colder patience. I sent photos of the fence, the work order the crew had waved at me. The emblem. She called back and said the document was a joke, legally vague. No clear authority to alter our property. The bylaws I emailed over didn't give Maple Crest the right to carve up backyards on a whim, even under the banner of safety. And Aegis Perimeter Systems, she said, wasn't just a security vendor. They specialized in integrated surveillance and perimeter control, the kind of language that made my skin crawl. That night, long after the sun went down, we woke to a metallic clanging in the yard. I grabbed a flashlight, heart hammering, and stepped outside with Laura right behind me. The beam caught a shadow hunched near the fence, hands busy with something at the base. When the light hit him fully, he froze, then bolted into the dark, leaving a small toolbox and a rolled-up set of blueprints behind. The kind of mistake people make when they think no one is watching. Spread out on our kitchen table, those blueprints were labeled Phase 2 Implementation, Aegis Perimeter Systems, full of technical notes I didn't fully understand. But I understood enough to know this wasn't just about steel and wire. There were symbols and callouts that Monica Reyes later identified as motion sensors, data lines, a centralized monitoring hub, a live surveillance grid disguised as a fence. The neighborhood wasn't being protected, it was being watched, and no one had asked permission. Monica dug deeper and pulled a contract from public records, a deal between Aegis Perimeter Systems and a development company called Northbridge Urban Holdings. Spelled out in cool, clinical language, it described strategic interventions to reduce property desirability in targeted neighborhoods. Just a fancy way of saying they planned to make life so uncomfortable that families like ours would sell low, move out, and hand the land over to whoever had written the biggest check. Once you see that in black and white, you can't unsee it. Things escalated fast after that. A black SUV with tinted windows started appearing across the street, engine idling, just sitting there, like a question someone refused to ask out loud. Laura found an unmarked envelope in our mailbox with a single typed line, "Stop interfering or you'll regret it." The kind of cheap, anonymous threat that's supposed to burrow into your brain and grow roots of doubt. Instead, it made something harden in me. Not bravado, just a quiet decision. I was done playing nice. When a new crew in dark, logoless uniforms showed up in our yard with equipment that looked like high-end surveillance hardware, and one of them had the nerve to tell us to stand back from our own grass because this was an authorized operation. I started recording everything: faces, plates, devices. Laura took pictures from every angle. That same day, we got a notice taped to our front door from Maple Crest Association, accusing us of obstructing an approved safety project, slapping us with a $10,000 fine and hinting at foreclosure if we kept pushing back. That was the moment we stopped treating it like a dispute and started treating it like a case. With Monica Reyes' help, we compiled everything into a dossier: photos, videos, the Aegis emblem, the blueprints, the Northbridge contract, the threat note, the bogus fine, every phone call, every evasive answer from Maple Crest Association. We filed a formal complaint with the city, and when Monica said, "If they're going to play dirty in the shadows, you need to drag them into the light," Laura looked at me and said, "Then we go public." And I knew she was right, even though every part of me hated the idea of becoming those people on the evening news. When the hearing finally came, the room was packed. Neighbors sat behind us, some there to support, some just there for the show. At the far table, Vivian Ashford, the polished president of Maple Crest Association, sat between two expensive-looking lawyers and a pair of representatives from Aegis Perimeter Systems in matching suits. Their expressions said this was annoying, yes, but ultimately a formality, something they would crush with paperwork and patience. They didn't expect Monica Reyes. She laid it all out like a story with receipts: the unauthorized fence, the lack of notice, the meaningless work order, the wiring buried at the base of the posts, the midnight intruder, the blueprints stamped Phase 2. She projected photos and videos on the big screen, the barbed wire slicing through our yard, the black box humming quietly on the post, the men in unmarked uniforms telling us we could face consequences for standing in our own grass. She walked the council through the HOA bylaws line by line, showing how none of this was allowed. Then she dropped the contract between Aegis Perimeter Systems and Northbridge Urban Holdings on the table like a hammer, highlighting the phrases that stripped away the last bits of their "we're just keeping you safe" mask. When a council member asked Vivian Ashford directly if she had signed off on that contract, she hesitated just long enough to tell everyone in the room the truth. She started babbling about the greater good and long-term planning, but the air had already shifted. The neighbors behind us weren't just curious anymore, they were angry. By the time the council finished deliberating, my hands were shaking. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until they read the decision. The fence and all related equipment had to be removed immediately at the HOA's expense. The partnership with Aegis Perimeter Systems was voided. Maple Crest Association was fined for violating property rights, and Vivian Ashford was suspended pending a full investigation into the association's practices, the council said, in careful legal language, what we'd been screaming in our heads for weeks. This wasn't safety, it was overreach, abuse, greed dressed up as concern. In the weeks that followed, crews came back, this time with permits and supervision, to dismantle the fence, pull up the posts, rip out the wiring, take down the black box. Our yard looked wounded, pockmarked with holes and dead patches. But it was ours again, truly ours. Neighbors who had stayed silent before started stopping by with cookies and apologies. Some of them joined with us to push for a complete overhaul of Maple Crest Association, new bylaws, real transparency, limits on what any board could ever do again. On a crisp afternoon, Laura and I sat on the new deck we'd built where the fence once cut through, coffee in hand, watching the light spill across the bed she'd finally finished, the oaks swaying like they'd been rooting for us the whole time. She said, quietly, "We almost lost this," and I squeezed her hand and told her, "We didn't, because we said no, and we kept saying no." And for the first time since we moved in, the place felt like what we'd hoped it would be, not a perfect refuge, but a home we had bled a little for. The barbed wire is gone now, but there's a different kind of boundary in our backyard, not a fence, just a line we drew for ourselves, a line that says, "This is ours, and you don't get to take it just because you have a letterhead and a lawyer." And sometimes I find myself wondering, as I watch the sun go down over Oak Ridge Lane, where's that line for you? At what point does community safety become an excuse for control? When an HOA, or a company, or anyone with power decides your fear is more profitable than your peace? Do you comply for the sake of quiet, or do you push back and risk everything? When is it right to fight, not just for a yard full of flowers, but for the idea that home really should mean yours, not theirs?